Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 20. In these PowerPoint slides, we're going to take a look at the lymphatic system. What exactly does it do for the body? What is it made out of? Including what are some of the cells, tissues, and organs that contribute to the lymphatic system. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at exactly what this system entails. Your lymphatic system is known for the fact that it's able to collect a fluid called lymph, and it's able to filter that fluid to detect any type of foreign abnormalities, like maybe bacteria or viral cells, and alert the immune system that there is a pathogen within the body. In order for your lymphatic system to be completely successful, what we need to talk about is the fact that when we were discussing our blood vessels previously, we talked about the arteries and the veins. Arteries are known for carry blood away from the heart, and in that process are able to drop off nutrient and oxygen to the cells. And then the veins, on the other hand, have the job of returning the fluid back to the heart. And along the way, they're carrying deoxygenated blood that can have waste products and whatnot, anything that needs to be filtered out. Well, what if I say to you that the veins only return about 80% of the fluid back to the heart? What happens to the other 20%? Well, the other 20% is going to be taken care of by our lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is going to be able to drain this interstitial fluids that's left behind by the veins, and it's going to enter into the lymphatic system, which will be a collection of different capillaries, vessels, ducts, and trunks. We're going to take a look at all these different parts in a little bit. And as it's flowing through the lymphatic system, it turns out that the fluid, which we're going to call lymph, is going to have the opportunity to be filtered by our lymph nodes. And if the lymph nodes detect any abnormalities, they're able to communicate with our immune system so that they can go ahead and bring over our different white blood cells to the site of injury and thereby control the spread of the pathogen. Now, your lymphatic vessels offer a one-way system. So that means that their only goal is to allow for the lymph to flow back to the heart, because by the time it gets to the heart, the lymph will get added into the regular blood flow, thereby restoring the venous return. And then once again, the arteries will carry it away, 80% will come back with the veins, and the other 20% will come back with the lymphatic system. Within the vessels itself, there are some lymphatic capillaries, and then as it starts converging and getting closer to the heart, we see that these vessels will get larger, so we're going to have to mention those as well. So as you can see at the bottom of your slide, it says larger lymphatic vessels, and from there it will collect into trunks and ducts until it's ready to be inserted back into the veins. All right, now let's just talk a little bit about the capillaries. Now, very similar to your blood system, the capillaries are going to be the smallest blood vessels. So the lymphatic capillaries will be the smallest structure within our lymphatic system. And they will be the first ones that come into contact with the lymph fluid, with the interstitial fluids. If you were to describe the capillaries, you would notice that it has what we like to call blind-ended vessels, meaning that there's only one way in, and once inside, the lymph can't come out of it again, and it will weave in between the different tissues and blood capillaries, working very closely with the nearby veins as well as capillary beds. I also want to mention that there are some areas in the body that do not have access to lymphatic capillaries, and those are going to be the bones, your teeth, the bone marrow, the cerebral spinal fluid. They will not have these blind-ended vessels, these lymphatic capillaries present in their location. I should also mention that in addition to being blind-ended, meaning only fluid can come in, not come out, it turns out that the capillaries are more permeable than the blood capillaries. And because they're more permeable, they'll have an easier time allowing the fluid to enter into the lumen, as well as they'll be able to take up larger molecules like proteins or cell debris, as well as any pathogens like bacteria, cancer cell, viral infected cells. One of the reasons why it's important to know about your lymphatic system is because we see that because a lot of their vessels will run parallel to the blood vessels, we see that when you study a disease such as cancer, these cancer cells, once they get access to your blood flow, can also get access to your lymphatic system. And once inside the lymphatic vessels, it can basically spread all over the body, thereby allowing for secondary or cancers to break out, or what we like to call metastasis, meaning that it spreads from its original site over to other parts. Unfortunately, when it comes to cancer, what we see happening is that the higher degree of metastasis there is, meaning the more the cancer spread, the more difficult it becomes to treat the disease. So the goal is to obviously get tested, get screened, and if there is cancer, for it to get caught at a very early stage where it's somewhat still sequestered and it hasn't really metastasized yet. Here's an illustration of your blood vessels and your lymphatic systems working together. So let's start on top on our left-hand side. We see the heart, and as you can see, we have our arterial system carrying the blood away, and from the arteries, they start off really large, like the aorta, and as they go throughout the body, they start tapering down, getting smaller and smaller until you get to your capillaries. And at your capillaries, that's where you will have your maximum exchange of diffusion. So your gases will get dropped off here at a higher rate, nutrients, and then we pick up things like our waste products and CO2, and those are going to get carried towards the heart, away from the capillary, towards the heart, courtesy of the veins. Notice how the line drawn was in blue to indicate that it was deoxygenated blood that's traveling back. And as I mentioned to you before, it turns out that the veins will only return back about 80% of the fluid. The other 20 is going to come over here into the green sections. Now here in green is our lymphatic system. As you can see from the insert picture, it intertwines very closely with the capillary bed, and as the lymphatic capillaries are intertwining, they're able to take in that interstitial fluid. Notice how they have the blind end, meaning once you're in, you're not coming back out. And it will also assure that once the fluid is picked up by the capillary beds, it will start moving in an upward pattern over back to the heart. And as you can see from the sequences right here, it's labeled lymphatic capillaries, which will eventually drain into what we like to call the collecting lymphatic vessels. Those are larger. Then we're going to go ahead into our lymphatic trunk and then into the duct. And from the duct, we'll be able to restore the flow back into veins so it can go back into the heart, and we can do this all over again. Now also notice on this picture how you have these like kidney-shaped structures right here that I'm circling. Those are going to be your lymph nodes. Your lymph nodes are very important because they will do the filtration of the lymph, and they will be one of the first sites that we're able to detect any type of pathogens that the immune system needs to get involved with to take care of. Now, I said to you before, the lymphatic capillaries will have an increased permeability, and part of that is the fact that they do have these little mini valves that will assure one-way flow. They also tend to be anchored by these little collagen filaments, and the reason the collagen filaments are so important is because it's going to allow to create a pressure point, so it makes it easier for the interstitial fluids or the extracellular fluids, meaning outside the cell, to penetrate or to enter into the capillaries. Obviously, once it's inside, or we see that the fluid starts to lessen, meaning that the pressure point starts to dwindle down, we see that valves will do what they're supposed to do, which is that they'll close off to prevent any backflow from occurring. So right over here, it tells you that the valves will close. And keep in mind that very similar to when we talked about the valves in the heart, as well as when you read about the valves in the blood vessel chapter, you're going to notice that they're there to ensure one-way flow. So once the lymph is inside, we only want it to move upwards back to the heart. We don't want it to go back into the tissue. Now, lymphatic fluid tends to be a clear color, with the exception that when it goes into the intestinal area, those lymph vessels are called lacteals, and these are going to be specialized because they're going to help you with your digestion of fats, as well as the ability to deliver fatty lymph into the blood. And because of this special focus or special function, the lymph in the lacteals is actually more of a yellowish color. That's just because of its interaction with the fat molecules. So here is a nice little picture. We see our flap-like mini valve. And as you can see right here, you also see the little filaments that anchor the lymphatic capillary. onto the connective tissue. So it almost will pull, the filaments will pull, the valves will open up, fluid will get sucked in to the lumen, and once the fluid is in, the filaments will relax, thereby closing the valve. As the lymph continues to move up the capillaries, we're going to eventually see that it will start draining into a larger structure called a collecting lymphatic vessels. Now, the collecting lymphatic vessels will also have some valves. They do have slightly thinner walls. A lot of them will run parallel to veins, and from a structure point, they have a lot in common with the veins. And also what we see is that we can have anastomosis. Anastomosis is basically a pooling or a collecting of several blood vessels within one location. The nice thing about them is that they allow you to handle a large volume of liquid at the same time because it serves almost as a collecting point between them. As we migrate from the capillaries to the collecting vessels, then now we get into the lymphatic trunks. Now the trunks are going to be the union of the collecting vessels, so it's going to allow you to drain a larger area of your body, and it turns out that there are 5 trunks that we've been able to identify. We see that we have a pair, meaning 2 of them, in the lumbar section. This is going to take care of sort of like the lower back area, which is going to allow lymph to be drained from the lower extremities, so your legs and your lower back area. Then we have another pair that's more towards the lungs, and it's going to take care of your thoracic cavity drainage. That's going to be the bronchomediastinum. Then we have the subclavian. That one's also paired. That one's going to run closer to the collarbone. The jugular trunks are also paired, and these are going to run closer into the neck region. And then last but not least, we'll have one that's in the intestines, so it will be more concerned with drainage from the digestive system. This one is single, and it's the intestinal trunk. So we went from capillaries to collecting vessels, and now we're in the lymphatic trunks. And every time we upgrade, we're basically getting a larger and larger entity to collect all this fluid, all this lymph that was circulating around the body. We have one more structure to mention, and that is going to be the ducts. So from the trunks, you'll go into the ducts, and we have 2 of them. You have the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. Now, the distribution of work is not equal amongst the ducts. So go ahead and take a look at your PowerPoint, and it says right here. It says the right lymphatic duct will drain lymph from the right upper arm and the right side of the head and the thorax. Okay, so the right upper arm and the right side of the head and the thorax. And what does the thoracic duct do? It drains the rest of the body. So that means it's going to take care of all your lower extremities. It's going to take care of your abdominal cavity. It's going to take care of your right upper arm. It's going to take care of the, of your left upper arm. It's going to take care of the left side of the head, and it's going to take care of the left side of the thoracic cavity. So the equal distribution is completely off over here with the lymphatic ducts. The thoracic duct will also have this like large sac enlargement. We call it the cisterna silae. Those are very easy to identify. For those of us who are taking lab, if we have the opportunity to dissect, I believe cats is what they did last time I checked. When you get into the digestive system, see if you can find the sac. It is usually located within the intestinal regions. Now, once you're able to gather your lymph from the capillary to the collecting vessels, to the trunks, and to the duct, now it's time to return that lymphatic fluid back into circulation. So what we're going to see is that it's going to drain into either the jugular or the subclavian vein, and from there on, it will go back into the vena cava, and from there, it enters into the right atrium, and the blood flow has been completely restored, and we start it all over again. All right, so let's take a look at some pictures. So remember, we're using the color code green to indicate our lymphatic system, and you can see the right lymphatic duct highlighted here for you in red. You can also see your thoracic duct that's been labeled. Here's the cisterna chyli. Here's that little sac that I was telling you about around the intestines. And then also notice when you get towards the top, you can see your little jugular vein and your subclavian veins. And notice how the lymphatic system is intimately communicating with them right here, allowing the lymph fluid to be drained back into your blood vessels. And then from there on, the total amount of fluid returning to the heart is restored. And keep in mind that the whole reason we did this is because along the way, we wanted the lymphatic fluid, the lymph, to pass through lymph nodes so it can be filtered and any abnormalities could be detected. Here is the distribution of our lymphatic duct and our thoracic duct. So they use the color code green. You can see it right here. And this is showing you what the right lymphatic duct does. So I'm going to take my little arrow and I'm going to move it down. And as you can see, it takes care of the right arm, the right side of the face, the neck, and the thoracic cavity. Not a lot. So here's the right lymphatic duct at work draining its property. And then in red, that's what the thoracic duct does. And as you can see, it's not only taking care of the left side of the face, the left side of the thoracic cavity, the left side of the neck. It's also taking care of your entire abdominal region as well as your lower extremities. Now keep in mind that regardless of which duct you're looking at, all systems, meaning all fluid of the lymphatic system, will eventually get drained either into your jugular or your subclavian veins. And from there on, it's back to the heart. All right, so just a few notes. Now that you've hopefully become a little familiar with the the lymph vessels that are being utilized to transport the lymph, I definitely want to point out the fact that if we're looking at the transport, so the movement of the lymph, you want to keep in mind that it's going to be a very low pressure system. So it's very similar to the veins, not only in the fact that it has valves, and it will often run parallel with the veins, but also it has a very low pressure. And the low pressure is essential because we want the lymph to move at a slow enough pace that we're able to properly filter it through the lymph nodes. The mechanism that it will use to maintain its movement are also very similar to the venous system in the fact that it can use, for instance, the milking action of the skeletal muscle. So as you move your arms and your legs, the contractions of it are literally massaging your lymphatic capillaries, collecting vessels so that the lymph can keep moving from point A to point B. As it gets closer to your thoracic cavity, the suction that's generated by the pressure changes of the lungs breathing in and breathing out will allow for the lymphatic fluids to also flow a little bit faster, making it easier to be returned into the jugular and subclavian veins. It has valves that are going to prevent backflow from occurring. It can also use the pulsating actions of the arteries. So as they're expanding and relaxing, it will allow that fluid, that movement to also transfer over to the lymphatic vessels, allowing the lymph to move. And last but not least, the contraction of the smooth muscle within the walls of the lymphatic system itself. So the lumen itself will assist with that as well. And the whole reason behind this is because as we see the fluid moving, if we need to alert the immune system, we see that immobilizing that particular area is going to help with the inflammatory material staying intact, as well as allowing the white blood cells to come over quicker. On the other hand, physical activity tends to increase the flow of lymph. So we can always alter the transport. Just keep in mind that the whole goal is to move at a slow enough pace that we can filter the lymph and alert the immune system if need be. So within the lymphatic system, there is a collection of cells that are specific to their function. And then we also have some tissues and organs. So I definitely want to introduce them to you over here. And then in chapter 21, we're basically going to spend the whole time talking about all these different cells and how they contribute to the different immune systems that we have, meaning our innate, the one we're born with, and our adaptive immune system. So the one that we kind of develop as we go about living our lives. So over here on the slide, let's start by taking a look at some of the cells you're going to come across in your lymphatic system as well as in your immune system, because they're going to work together. So as you can see right here, within it, the cells can be divided as those that will assist with your immune system, and then those that will help with the structure formation, and those we're going to call supporting cells. Now, the cells that are going to be essential for your immune system, those are going to be your lymphocytes. This is a type of white blood cell. And within the lymphocytes, we see that the two most important ones are going to be your T cells and your B cells. Now, both of them are lymphocytes. What we will see happening is that they're going to be part of what we call our adaptive immune system, meaning that as we live our lives and we become exposed to different pathogens, you will develop specific T cells and specific B cells for each pathogen that you become exposed to. They will also allow you to form an immunity because of the fact that they keep a memory of that pathogen, so that the next time you become exposed, you can have a faster response time. And a lot of times that means that your symptoms will be less drastic, or you might be asymptomatic. You might not even have any symptoms or be bothered by the pathogen because your immune system has figured out a way to control its overall viral or pathogenic load. Now, your T cells get their name because they will mature in the thymus, and your B cells get their name because they will mature in the bone marrow. More to come about those. Now, here it says for you, it says your T cells and your B cells will protect against antigens. Now, antigens are receptors. You can have self-antigens, which means they belong to you, and you can have foreign antigens. When we discuss the immune system, often the indication of an antigen will stipulate that we're looking at a foreign antigen or a pathogenic antigen. So something like a bacteria cell, a virus cell, any type of abnormality, like even a cancer cell that doesn't naturally belong in a healthy body, will have an antigen that's slightly different and will be marked as being foreign. Now, when the T cell becomes exposed to these antigens, we see that they do have the ability to actively destroy these cells, meaning that they can kill it off directly, whereas the B cells are going to be known for producing antibodies. And antibodies are able to interact with the foreign antigen, they're able to mark it, they're able to bind to it, but they cannot directly kill the pathogens. So the T cells can directly kill, and the B cells can mark and immobilize, but they don't directly kill. And this is just a little intro. Like I said, in our next chapter, we're going to have a lot more details about exactly how you develop the T cells and the B cells, as well as their mechanism of action. Besides the T and the B cells, you also have other white blood cells that will play a role. One of them is going to be the macrophages. Macrophages are courtesy of the monocytes. Macrophages are known for the fact, and here's a little picture of one, that they can phagocytose or bulk eat any type of foreign entities. You also have your dendritic cells. Dendritic cells will tend to capture a foreign pathogen and they will deliver it over to the lymph nodes, so they can alert the rest of your T cells as well as your B cells. And some of you might remember when we did 2085, when we did the integumentary system, the skin, one of the main cells there was the Langerhans cell. That is an example of a dendritic cell, because what it does is it just scavenges through your skin cells and it tries to come across, or it tries to identify any type of foreign invader or pathogen, and thereby present it to your immune system so it can be contained. Now, I do want to point out that your macrophages and your dendritic cells are part of what we call your innate immune system. All of us are born with them and they all perform the same. Whereas your T cells and your B cells, each of us will have individualized ones because it depends on the pathogens that you become exposed to. So your immune cells are going to be your T cells, your B cells, your macrophages, and your dendritic cells. There are a few more, but these are the 4 main ones we want to start off with. And then your supporting cells are going to be called your reticular cells. Your reticular cells get their supporting role because they're able to produce these reticular fibers, and the reticular fibers will form stroma. Stroma means that you're creating almost like an outline or a scaffolding mechanism that can be used for the white blood cells to kind of anchor to and wait until they're called over to fight off any type of pathogen. So here's a little picture of reticular connective tissue at work. You can see the fibers all over, creating the stroma, and then it creates these different cavities within, whether we're looking at a tissue or an organ, where the white blood cells can in essence just hang out. So here we have a little macrophage. We have our little reticular cells that are building the reticular fibers. We have other white blood cells that are hanging out within the sinus, within the opening, and they just kind of sit there and wait until they're called upon by our lymphatic system as well as the immune system to go over to the site of injury. I have a little demo of a macrophage phagocytosing. If you ever want to see how it bulk eats any foreign antigen, I would definitely suggest that you click on the link and take a look at it. I've also inserted a little snippet of it on the next slide, so I'm going to go ahead and click over. And here we have a little macrophage. You can see it right here, and notice how it's interacting with these perfect circles. Look how it's consuming them. And this, ladies and gents, is phagocytosis. That is bulk eating. So it will use its cytoplasmic contents to create these little pseudopods, these little extensions, and then it will trap the foreign antigen. Look at that. And it will literally engulf it. It will bulk eat it, and that is one of the first ways that our body can get rid of a pathogen. Obviously, if you have a larger invader, a larger load of pathogens, then the macrophages will be one of the first to kind of encounter it. And then part of what they'll do is through their mechanism of action, they'll alert the other T cells and B cells to come over and assist in the immune system response. Look at it go. Look at that. Isn't that amazing that the cell can do that? So that is phagocytosis. And in case you were wondering, yes, it's also endocytosis. Endocytosis means forming a vessel and then entering into the cell. And phagocytosis is one of the subcategories of endocytosis. Phagocytosis is bulk eating. And then some of you might remember penocytosis. That's when it's liquid, so people like to call it bulk drinking. And then you also have receptor-mediated endocytosis. All right, so within this lymphatic system, we discussed the little cells. Let's take a look at the lymphoid tissue. Now, tissues are going to be a grouping of cells. They're going to provide an excellent housing mechanism and site for proliferation of the different white blood cells. They also will have what we like to call a surveillance type of function. So the lymphocytes will be able to kind of sit there. They'll be able to they'll be able to be alerted to any type of pathogen that makes its way over. Most of the time, the lymphoid tissue is made out of reticular connective tissue, and part of that obviously comes from the fact that you have your reticular cells that help you with the formation of the stroma, utilizing those particular reticular fibers. Here you go. And as I mentioned to you before from the picture, the spaces that you're able to create with the fiber offer a fantastic place for the white blood cells to kind of hang out until they're called over to the site of injury. Within the tissue types itself, you can have two main distinguishments. It all depends on the overall structure. You can have what we like to call diffuse lymphoid tissue, and this is going to be a very loose type of arrangement of cells that are kind of bundled together. And if you want, you can take a look at the illustration right here. You can see that in the red box, I've indicated for you an area where you just have a collection of cells that are very informally kind of clustered together. They don't have a thick connective tissue that kind of separates them from the rest of the tissue or the organ. They're just very loosely arranged. And then what makes it so unique is that within this group of loosely arranged cells, you'll have the different white blood cells that are kind of hanging out, waiting to be alerted. And then the other category is when you have a slightly higher degree of organization of the tissue. And that will then be what we call our lymphoid follicles. Some books will label it as nodules. And probably the best example of this sort of higher degree of tissue organization are our Peyer's patches. So here you are in the little picture inserted. You can see the red box surrounding it. You can notice why they call it a nodule, because it's slightly sequestered from the rest of the tissue, making it easier to kind of stand out and identify. These little Peyer patches are found in the ileum, which is the end part of the small intestines, and they basically just form like these little dips, these little cavities, and the white blood cells will just kind of sit there, waiting for them once again to come across a pathogen or to be alerted to go over to the site of injury. You can also have that they'll serve as what we call germinal centers, which means that the B cells can utilize that particular area to proliferate. Oh, the appendix, there you go. That's another example of a lymphoid follicle because it has a higher degree of organization. Now, after you form your tissues, then what we see is that you can go ahead and you can even increase the complexity of the structure more. And in this case, you would go from a tissue over to an organ. An organ will have a separate connective tissue layer that will allow it to be completely isolated from the rest of the body, the rest of the organs and tissues and cells. So that's how you would distinguish a tissue from an organ. An organ has a higher degree of organization, and once again, it will have a thick connective tissue capsule that will kind of surround the borders, making it clear where it starts and where it ends. Within your lymphatic organs, there is a subdivision into the primary and secondary organs. Your primary lymphoid organs are going to be your thymus and your bone marrow. And the way you're going to remember this is you're going to think about your T cells and your B cells. T is for the thymus, B is for the bone marrow. The reason these are called primary lymphatic organs is because as part of their maturity process, your T cells and your B cells, once created in the bone marrow, need to go over to either the thymus for the T cells or stay within the bone marrow for the B cells to become mature, or what we like to call immunocompetent, meaning that that is then where they learn to distinguish between a self-antigen and a foreign antigen. Because of this ability to mature there and become immunocompetent, that is then why the thymus and the bone marrow are considered primary lymphatic organs. The rest of the organs are going to be labeled as secondary. And secondary simply means that I'm going to have my mature lymphocytes, including my T cells and my B cells. They are going to go over to the area and they're going to basically just be housed there. And they're going to stay there, they're going to help monitor the area, and when they become activated, they're going to hop into the bloodstream and go over to the site of injury. Some examples of lymphatic organs are going to be our lymph node, our spleen, our MALT, which stands for mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, and then there's also some diffuse lymphoid tissue that we'll have to talk about, like for instance, when we take a look at our tonsils, we're going to explore that a little bit further. Now, keep in mind that when we take a look at our secondary lymphatic organ, there is only one that can actively filter the lymph. And I shouldn't even say secondary. When we take a look at all our lymphatic organs, there's only one organ that can actively filter the lymph, and that is going to be the job of the lymph nodes. So here is a nice little illustration, and notice how they have highlighted the lymphatic organs. If you look on your left-hand side, you're going to notice that they've highlighted the primary ones, Please keep in mind those are going to be the T and the B. So the T will be for thymus, where our T cells will become mature, and the B is going to be for bone marrow. Keep in mind this is a red bone marrow. In case you're wondering, the other bone marrow is yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow is mostly adipose or fat tissue, whereas red bone marrow still has its homopoiesis, meaning it can still produce the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. On the other side of the drawing, on my right-hand side, I see the secondary lymphoid organs, and that is where I'm going to have my lymph nodes, my tonsils, my spleen, the Peyer's patches can fall in this category as well. The appendix can be listed. And what we need to do is we need to explore the lymph nodes a little bit more, because remember, they are the only organ within the entire lymphatic system that is able to filter out the lymph fluid and alert the immune cells to come over to the site of injury. I'm going to go ahead and stop part 1 of the chapter right here, and then whenever you're ready, please proceed to part number 2, where we're going to explore these lymphatic organs a little bit more and take a look at what they look like on the inside, as well as exactly what their function is when it comes to the lymphatic cells. Please keep in mind that if anything comes up and you have a question, a concern, or whatnot, please do not hesitate to email me. And like I said many times before, we also have our discussion sessions that can be utilized to increase student interaction within our class itself. Alrighty, so I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I will see you for part 2.